Hi guys, this week we're going to focus on stretching of the hip muscles. I know that handouts have been sent home to you on different stretches to complete with your students, but this week we're going to break down stretching of the hip muscles. So when it comes to stretching, really no one could ever stretch enough. More than likely you cannot overstretch. Now sometimes there are doctor's orders that a student or a person cannot put their hip into a certain position. If that's the case, then of course avoid doing that stretch. However, on more cases than not, it is okay to stretch the muscle as much as possible. And if I would make a suggestion, I would suggest to complete stretching to each muscle group, holding 60 seconds 3 times and completing that 3 times a day. So the stretches we're going to go over for the hip muscles include hip internal rotation, hip external rotation, hip flexion, hip extension, and hip adduction. Now, the reason that muscles have a tendency to get tight is because our bones naturally grow, but our muscles do not grow. So it is our job to stretch them in order for them to keep up with bones growing. Now, we really see a change happening between the 9 to 13-year-old age because there's big growth spurts and the bones are growing extremely rapidly and the muscles are not able to keep up. So I suggest always starting with the stretching program. If there's only a little bit of time in the day and you don't really know what to work on, the best thing is to get some range of motion in, and it's something that all of us can work on improving in our life. So like I said, in the video you are going to see stretches that include 5 different stretches. Sorry, that was a little confusing. And these stretches are also going to be located in a PDF. Okay, so the first 2 we're going to talk about is hip internal and external rotation. The one way to tell if your hip is internally rotating, when they're sitting on a surface, their knees kind of come in like this. And they're like together, but also rotated in. Now, if your hips are externally rotated, then they're kind of like sitting outward and rotated out. So the first thing you're going to want to do is determine which one's tight. Just by, determining how much range of motion they have. So if we're going to stretch internal rotation, the internal rotators, we're going to want to stretch to external rotation. Come to on top of me, please. So you're going to want to keep the knee on top of the hip and rotate the toe inward like this. Okay. So now we're going to stretch the external rotators. And to stretch the external rotators, we're going to stretch the internal rotators. I know it sounds very complicated, and you're not going to go wrong by stretching them both. It's always a good thing, unless the doctor gives you precautions. All right, go ahead and videotape on top. We're going to want to make sure that the knee is on top of the hip, and you're going to be actually rotating the feet outward. How do you feel? Do you feel a stretch?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so you're going to want, again, for these stretches, both of them, you're going to want to hold them for about 1 minute, complete it 3 times, and try to do that at least 2 to 3 times per day. Okay, so now we're going to focus on stretching the hip flexors and hip extensors. We can kind of stretch both of them all at one time. The hip flexors are on the front side of the hip, and the hip extensors are on the back. And if I move this knee into hip flexion, so hip flexion, it's going to stretch his hip extensors. And with me keeping this leg extended, it's stretching his hip flexors on this side. So they're total opposites. And then I would want to, again, hold that for the length of time and switch to the opposite side. Like this. And if you can come on top of me so they can see what this looks like. So again, when doing this, you want to really keep this leg down on this side, stretch this up on this side. Okay, go ahead from the other angle. Actually, you can keep this on top too. I'm going to ask him to roll to the side. So another way to stretch a hip flexor, and you're going to want to be on top for this. You want the student's body in a straight line right here. You're gonna bend the knee. They can either keep the knee on the bottom bent or straight. This, like I said, this is gonna stretch the hip flexors. You're gonna grab onto his knee and bring the leg back, and that's stretching that muscle right in the front right there. A lot of our students really need this muscle stretched due to them being in their wheelchair a lot and being in a sitting position. We have a tendency to have tight hip flexors. So it's a really great muscle to stretch. All right, so the last muscle we're gonna stretch for the hips is called the hip adductor muscle. It's the muscle that brings our legs in. So a lot of our students have a tendency to really have their knees adducted together in a wheelchair. When I say that, I mean they're like really together instead of in a neutral position. And we really want to work on having that muscle stretched out because it helps to keep the hip in the socket. When we have the adductor muscles pulling down, it's kind of like the hip is in the socket and it's pulling down like this. So that's how our hip kind of gets dislocated. So we definitely want to be certain to get a hip adductor stretch. And like I said, you will not do any harm in completing this unless a doctor tells you you should not complete it. So it's kind of like a butterfly stretch. They keep their feet together. You slowly open their legs till you feel resistance. And when you feel resistance, you would just want to go a little bit more. You can go ahead and come on top. So, like you see, their body's in straight alignment and their feet are together and you're stretching as much as you can. And it's really going to stretch this muscle right here. And that is super important for us to be able to maintain a neutral hip alignment in all seating positions. Another thing that can work on stretching the adductors though is ring sit position. Go ahead and come up in a sitting position for me. So, there you go. So when they're sitting down and we're working on our sitting positions and they're in a ring, that helps stretch their adductor muscles. So that's another good reason to work on ring sitting position with your student. All right, so that's it for the hip stretches. Again, we did hip internal rotators, external rotators, hip flexors, hip extensors, and hip adductors. So hopefully you're able to enjoy this video, work on some stretches with your kids. If you have any questions, you can refer to the PDF or just give us therapists a message and ask us any questions you need. Thank you.